Hello everyone, welcome to Scicomm Monday. I'm your host, Nicole Wood. If you're new to Scicomm Monday, we're going to be talking about Hawaiian birds today. And so our format here is we mostly try to do a live broadcast with an engaging format. So please feel free to send any questions in while you can. And we want to make this as engaging as possible. So if we don't get to your questions, then please feel free to tweet us afterwards, and then we'll get to them on that format. So our special guest today is Charles B. Van Rees. He's a PhD candidate at Tufts University, and he works with birds in Hawaii, of all places. So please help me welcome to Scicomm Monday, Charles B. Van Rees. So welcome, Charles.
Hi, thank you, and thanks for having me here.
So how about you just tell us a little bit about how did you get to where you are, a little bit of your academic history.
Sure, I think the number one question I tend to get, especially in Hawaii, is why is this random guy from Boston over here doing work on our water birds? I've been interested in biodiversity conservation for quite some time, and I spent some time after my undergraduate working in field ornithology and sort of picking up on the skills and the science with birds, and specifically bird conservation. And when I started graduate school at Tufts, I was really interested in wetland ecosystems. I had gotten involved with an interdisciplinary program in water diplomacy, which focused on issues pertaining to sort of the nexus of society and natural phenomena. So I was, of course, interested in combining the human and natural elements of biodiversity conservation with water being sort of a major nexus there. So I was interested in wetlands and wildlife and looking for a good system where I could be working with a threatened taxon and also a system where water was particularly important. So that's sort of where Hawaii came in. Was my PhD advisor, Michael Reed, has done some work with Hawaiian wetlands in the past, and he's had some students working with some of the other wetland birds in Hawaii. And so he started recommending this study system, and as I looked into it, I was more and more fascinated by it. And I'm sure we can sort of get into it more later, but there are a lot of societal issues around water in Hawaii, both involving sort of indigenous culture and the way that water was managed historically, but also how it's been managed since then, and also sort of wetland habitats being something that no one really thinks about having to do with Hawaii. So that's sort of what drew me there, was a combination of the ecological side, which was, hey, we have a lot of questions about these birds still, and they're endangered, and that's, of course, a really excellent study system for a conservation biologist, but also the ecosystem that they were persisting in, which was one that is surrounded by so much. There's so much legal and social importance and cultural value sort of associated with different parts of wetlands and what they can provide, that they struck me as a really great way for me to combine my interests in studying the natural world as a natural historian, but also being interested in the social and human side, which, as far as I'm willing to say, we can't really save species unless we can understand that side pretty well. So.
Great. So we had a question come in. So what birds do you actually study?
So
what kind of birds are there?
The one species that I'm particularly working with is the Alae or Hawaiian gallinule. It's a subspecies of the common gallinule, which is in the rail family. So they're sort of like, I usually explain them to people as being sort of like water chickens. A lot of people will think of them as ducks, but rails are very, they like to run around a lot, and they're very sort of cryptic. They hide in tall vegetation and things like that. So they're not as visible as ducks oftentimes. These ones are a little bit more so. But they're a small blackish gray water bird with a really striking red bill and facial shield that goes kind of up above towards their forehead. So they have a kind of a really unique appearance, and they're pretty well known throughout the world. They're the actual species to which they belong, which is the common gallinule, and their close relative, the common moorhen, are found pretty much on the majority of continents, with the exception of Antarctica. And this is one subspecies of the common gallinule that's endemic to Hawaii. So they were formerly found in all of the main Hawaiian islands, persisting in these small wetlands, and since then have actually been extirpated from most of the islands. And they only persist on 2 islands now, Kauai and Oahu.
So, did the Native Hawaiians bring them over when they transitioned across the Pacific, or were they already there? Do you know that?
I've been reading some speculation on that. Generally, it's not thought that they were brought for any reason. I've been told by hunters on the mainland that common gallinules taste really awful, and so I wouldn't imagine that they that they were brought over for food or anything like that. So I think people generally think they arrived on the islands naturally. So rails in general have a very strong propensity to colonize islands. They're weird little birds that can take off from water very easily, and just for some reason we've noticed throughout natural history that they've been arriving on small isolated islands and then very quickly becoming flightless. And so we have all these endemic rails all over the islands of the Pacific, and these are no exception, except that they're not really becoming flightless. Although some of my research might be arguing that they are in some ways. So some of the speculation has been that when the Native Hawaiians arrived on the Hawaiian Islands, they had a lot of aquaculture. So they were doing a lot with fish ponds. They were also doing a lot with kalo or taro, also rice and things like that. So they had a lot of wetland crops, which are suspected actually to have provided a tremendous amount of habitat for these birds after native arrival. So it could be that when the Native Hawaiians showed up, they actually increased the populations of these birds that prior to their arrival might have been surviving at much lower numbers in sort of the natural upspringing wetlands that were persisting throughout. So and you can kind of see an example of this on one of their major population strongholds on the island of Kauai, the Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge, where there's actually a lot of active kalo or taro agriculture going on, and the birds seem to be persisting quite readily in that environment.
Neat. So where on the islands are you doing this? Like, where are wetlands? I mean, I lived in Hawaii for 4 years, and I don't remember going and playing around in all the wetlands. There was mostly we just hung out on the beaches or went out to climbing through the mountains. So where are all these wetlands on Oahu and the rest of the islands?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, especially considering, I don't know anyone with the exception of myself and a few colleagues that think of wetlands when they think about Hawaii. We think of beaches and we think of coral reefs and, like you said, big mountains and beautiful forests and waterfalls and things like that. The wetlands on the Hawaiian Islands obviously are a product of their very unique geology and topography, right? So a lot of these islands are sort of flat from the coast, and then they shoot up all of a sudden. And as they get older and older, those islands are a little bit more slopey, but you really see this very dramatic change in topography. And what that's doing a lot of the time is that these very high mountain ridges are literally scraping moisture out of the clouds as they pass over. And so they're pulling rain down. A lot of this is called orographic rainfall. This rainfall is a lot of time percolating deep into the earth in the mountains, directed by volcanic dikes and geologic structures that are caused by their volcanic origins. This water is going very deep underground, and a lot of time coming pushed back up, sort of as these artesian wells out on these very level plains near the coast. So in sort of a natural environment, when you get down below sort of the really heavy-duty montane forest and you get to these flat parts, there are areas that are continuously inundated with water, both that's coming across the surface from these very flashy streams, but also that's coming up from underground in these artesian springs. And these areas would be almost perpetually wet, and so these form these natural wetlands. This is pretty unfortunate if you think about, sort of their juxtaposition with respect to things that humans like. A lot of these environments are always in a very flat place, a place with abundant fresh water, and a place with a really beautiful view of the ocean, which are all places that human beings would want to build a hotel or a village or what have you. So a lot of these major wetland areas have all been converted now because they're just prime real estate. So it's their origins, of course, are causing them quite a bit of trouble in terms of maintaining their natural functions.
Yeah, you sent me a couple of photos here showing the before and afters of wetland locations on Oahu,
Oh, yeah.
and it was quite striking. So I'm currently putting up the before picture, and you can see that there's quite a number of wetlands on those lowland areas. It seems like most of the black there are where the two mountain ranges are, if I'm interpreting the map correctly.
Right, that's it.
And then if you look to afterwards, it's almost all black on the map. and you've got on here that says over 75% is lost in the lowlands. That's a huge dramatic shift.
Yeah, and those are the habitats that birds like the Hawaiian gallinule are really specializing on. On the island of Kauai and Maui, and a little bit on Oahu, there are areas that are upland wetlands, and these are places where it just pretty much never stops raining. So you're getting wetland conditions despite not having the lowland sort of accumulation surface. But what we see, of course, on the maps primarily is that what we're losing is this stuff in the lowlands, because that's where all the development has gone on. If you look at aerial photos of these islands, all the development is around the coast. I mean, it's beautiful. You're near the beach. It's flat. You don't have to drive, up a 15% grade or anything to get home. They're very nice environments for people, and as a result, the wetlands get really wrecked. I would say one of the most notable big losses you can see on Oahu is actually down in the Honolulu area, especially around Waikiki Beach, which, if you look at pictures from 150 years ago, Waikiki Beach was, or rather just Waikiki, was an enormous wetland, right? That was just, I'm assuming, tremendously productive ecologically, and it was completely wiped out to fill in that whole area with this urban housing and development. And then the coastline was then converted to this beach, and actually what I was told was that none of the sand at the world's most famous beach is actually original. It all comes from the North Shore and was brought down there, and apparently needs to be replenished once in a while. It's funny to think about, but I can understand that surfers and people looking to get a tan and play beach volleyball would probably not have very much fun splashing around in the muck in the wetlands. So that's our cultural values there.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I lived there for 4 years, and I didn't even know that. I wouldn't be surprised with how much development that was there. We did have a question come in asking if the gallinules mate for life. Someone said that they've seen similar banding on birds together, and I'm going to put up a picture here of one of the birds that you had with the banding. So if you could also answer that question, then go into how you guys band the birds, and can you explain the banding colors to everyone out there?
Sure, absolutely. This is of course especially relevant to anybody listening from Hawaii, because we do have an ongoing citizen science project that I'm trying to plug big time, where anybody who sees a abandoned bird could really help our science tremendously by telling us where they saw it. We can get into that a little bit later. So speaking about the mating systems of these birds, I would say, from what I've seen, yes. I've heard kind of mixed things from the literature. The birds will definitely remate if their mate is killed, or we're assuming is killed. We've seen birds go missing from a territory for a couple of years, and then whoever their mate was is sitting there all alone, and then all of a sudden somebody new comes and they get remarried, one might say. But at least in the Hawaiian subspecies, we haven't seen a lot of evidence of individuals having multiple mates, or getting rid of a mate basically while they've already, or getting rid of a mate to have a new one at the same time or anything like that. So it seems to me that they do mate for life, or mate as long as they're both still around. They do tend to hold the same territories and things like that. And I imagine a good portion of that is that they're a little bit habitat limited, is that there's not a lot of this wetland habitat, and so they have to hold their territories very steady, and it kind of takes a team to do that. These birds are a little belligerent. If you see them in high densities, they really have a lot of territorial squabbles and things like that, and they'll really fight for space, which is pretty neat. And one thing we see actually quite a bit in the Hawaiian subspecies is what's called cooperative breeding. So we see actual family units forming with the two parents and some of their earlier kids who are now kind of teenagers and young adults, and those individuals are staying home for a while until they can, go off somewhere, and they're using the opportunity to sort of help raise their younger siblings and protect the territory and things like that. So the banding is basically the really basic bare bones way that we're monitoring these birds. If you band individuals, you can tell them apart really easily, so you can keep track of their survival across time, and also whether or not they moved. So if we band a bird in one place and it has a certain combination of colors, and someone sees it somewhere else, we know somehow it got there. Unless somebody gave it a ride in a truck, it must have gotten there by its own volition. And that's one of the big things we're trying to study. So to start with, we catch the birds usually in basically a standard cat trap, a walk-in trap. It's like a little cage with one door that's open, and the animals walk in trying to get some sort of a food reward, and then they step on a trammel, and the door comes crashing down, and they're sitting there until we come and get them. And interestingly enough, last year we discovered, or rather, I would say my assistants and field help kind of discovered this, that the best way to catch Hawaiian gallinules is with mango, which we never expected. And we had tried all sorts of things and very proteinaceous and nutritious foods and cat food and this and that, and they just weren't having it. But if you just take a nice mango and cut it up and put it in the back of the cage, they're just going to be fighting to get in there. So that's been our trick lately, is we put an old mango in the trap and catch the bird, and then we take them out very carefully. We keep them usually in a cloth bag so that they can't see and they can't struggle and hurt themselves, and it keeps them a little bit calmer. And then we're putting these bands on their legs. So one of them is a U.S. Geological Survey bird banding lab band, that just every bird that's banded in the United States has to have this band. It has a unique number on it for that bird. And we're doing a code of colors on for the other 4 bands on the leg. So the color that's on the same side as that metallic USGS band tells you what wetland the bird came from. So up on the north shore of Hawaii, the birds typically have yellow bands. The ones near Honolulu have purple bands. The ones at Kauainui Marsh are black. The ones at Hamakua Marsh are red. So that's sort of like the passport for the bird. You can see basically what country they're coming from. And then the other 2 are unique identifiers to that individual. So no other individual will have those exact 2 if they have that same passport band.
Neat. We had a question come in asking how big the territories are of the gallinule.
So the way I see it, this depends, like it does with a lot of other organisms, with the quality of the habitat, right? So they're going to try to keep the minimum size of territory that they have to fight for to still get everything they need to survive. So in the context of some lower quality habitats, for example, golf courses, that oftentimes these birds do very readily take to golf courses, and we see them on golf courses all the time. We actually spend a lot of time buzzing around on golf carts looking for them. Golf courses, of course, are not managed specifically for these birds' habitat. So it's not their fault that the habitat's not amazing. But because it is lower quality, the birds will have larger territories. I'm trying to think of some dimensions now. I don't know. I would say in really, really good territory, a really, really good habitat, a territory could be as small as maybe 400, 500 square feet, something like that. Even a lot smaller than that. But in very poor habitat, they can be whole, big ponds where the birds are just defending everything around it because they need all of those resources. So there can be quite a bit of variation.
Yep. So I was throwing up the map you sent me of where you were catching some of the gallinule, and it seems like you're pretty much all over the island, everywhere from Hawaii Kai all the way up to the North Shore there. And where have overall seems to be the most productive place for them on Oahu?
So we have, I would say, 2 really big strongholds on Oahu. The first of them is the James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge, which I think is abbreviated JCNR or something like that on the map. It's up on the North Shore, very, very up near the tip there. It's in Kahuku. And that's just a really fantastic federal property where they manage specifically for these birds, so the habitat's amazing. The reproductive success is really high. They're trapping invasive predators and things like that. And then down on the Kailua side, on the windward or east coast, there's Hamakua, which is HAMA on the map. And that's a state wildlife refuge that's just been getting an increasing amount of attention lately. And they've had a really great state biologist there who's been doing some excellent restoration work, as she has seen just enormous increases in the abundance of these birds. And those, I would say, are the main strongholds for the subspecies right now on Oahu. The genetic data that we'll be publishing very soon has shown us some indications that those places have played a pretty major role in the last 50 years or so as the population has been recovering.
Great. We got a question here. So, asking about what about the East Shore habitats out by the Iwa Plains?
The Evo plants. Oh, that'll be out on the west side, down that way. So I think there are a couple issues there. I haven't seen much in terms of habitat more towards the leeward side of the island, and I suspect there are a couple of reasons for it. I mean, the rainfall is considerably lower, but also there's been a pretty substantial amount of diversion of water that used to come down into that area, actually from the Ko'olau mountain range in the east. And a lot of that water has been diverted and moved to other places for agriculture and things like that. So I don't get the idea that there were many natural wetlands there to begin with. But of those that were, I think the majority have been pretty wrecked, for lack of a better word, by hydrological modification and things like that.
So how else are you guys tracking these? Are you just doing banding, or are you doing other things? That you sent me a picture, which it looks like it might have a backpack on there. So I'm wondering if you're doing any sort of telemetry.
Right. Yeah, we are, and emphasis on the we part, because this is something I could never have pulled off on my own. But in addition to the banding and to this genetic study that I mentioned briefly, we're looking to get some really much more real-time data on their movements that are not dependent, of course, on whether or not me or some other bird watcher can go out and see one of these birds, because they like to hide, and spotting their bands is not the easiest thing in the world. So I started collaborating very recently with Martha Kawasaki and Eben Paxton, who are both USGS scientists working on a Navy-funded project tracking two other water birds on the island, the Alae Ke'o or Hawaiian coot, and Io or Hawaiian stilt. And these birds are found quite a bit around Pearl Harbor and other areas of military importance, and so they're trying to keep an eye on them and how they're moving in and out of the properties. And what they've been doing is a really ingenious way of approaching it, where instead of just putting these transmitters on all the birds and then having to walk around with an antenna and listen for them all the time, they're actually setting up detection stations, little towers with antennas on them that are just continuously scanning and listening for the pings from individual birds, and then each bird's transmitter gives a specific signal that then that particular tower can say, okay, bird number 6 was here today, and then maybe another tower across the island says, oh, well, bird number 6 was here, just now, and so we can then infer movements from those sort of better detections, and nobody has to go and find the bird, which is really the difficult part with these guys, is they're tremendously sneaky. And so the telemetry work now we've been doing for, I guess, about a year and a half at the moment, and Martha's out there right now putting telemetry devices in some of these birds as we speak, and kind of improving the data set. But I'm really excited for the data there to come out of it. Of course, they're still sort of in the process of collection right now, but it should be really a powerful tool to learn about their behavior.
Yeah, I've seen some of that with sharks. They'll put the buoys out in the middle of the ocean, and when the sharks swim by, it pings off of that, and they know what particular shark has swum by that particular buoy, and it makes it a lot easier tracking, because that's a hard thing to track a shark down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So.
Yeah, I think that's worse than chasing a swamp bird, to be honest.
Right. So I know in Hawaii there's some issues with invasive species. I mean, not only is there the issues with all the development and climate change, but there's also issues with invasive species. And you sent me a couple of pictures showcasing some of the species there. I've got, I think it was the black francolin is introduced bird, which the one you sent, I like how you sent me the really adorable one versus like the one of the full grown.
Yeah, right. Well, so the francolin, I mean, I think the francolin I would call it more of an exotic species than invasive. Okay. I don't know enough about their ecology. They might be dispersing non-native plants and things that are more harmful. But invasive species are a problem for almost any native ecology in Hawaii. For the water birds, and this goes for the two other species I mentioned as well, the main threats are introduced mammals, because Hawaii has no native land mammals except for a bat, and I guess if you count seals. So there were no mammalian predators, and so things like mongoose, cats and dogs especially have been really decimating their populations and really hurting their reproductive success, because they're just not adapted to having to worry about that when they're nesting. And then sort of more subtle than that are invasive plants, which again a lot of hydrophytic or wetland specialist plants have been introduced. intentionally or otherwise, that are now taking over these wetland habitats and outcompeting the natives. And a lot of the time, they're wrecking the habitat for the birds, and whatever aspect of the habitat that birds like to rely on is quickly reduced or removed entirely, and that can make giant areas unsuitable for them. So probably the most upsetting example is the Kauainui Marsh on the windward side, where there used to be probably the biggest wetland in Hawaii there, freshwater wetland, and it was probably an enormous population source for these birds, and it has been completely taken over by this stuff that they call California grass. No disrespect to Californians, it's just, I don't know, that's what they call it. And it's an invasive grass that has been it just took over, and now the habitat is just really poor for these birds. And in the small areas that they've restored and removed some of this California grass, the birds have come back. And so it's evident that it's having a pretty major impact, even though it's not, this grass isn't marching up and eating babies. It's making the habitat unsuitable.
Yeah, I think with having that smaller location there of being on an island, I hear reports of islands feel those impacts of invasive species at a much higher rate than, say, a larger landmass like the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, where I'm at. So while we do still have a lot of invasive species here, you're so concentrated in that one area that you can really feel those impacts really quickly from those invasive species.
Right. Yeah, and then you have highly simplified ecology too, right? I mean, your trophic webs and everything are the connections are either looser in some ways, or they're so tight that anything that comes in and disrupts that ecosystem is a tremendous disruption, right? Because you have so many organisms that have evolved in this very isolated, very sort of eccentric context, that bringing in something from outside that is used to sort of continental levels of competition it's just going to dominate. It's going to be away from all of its native predators and control mechanisms. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, between the area and the ecology, it's invasive species are just an unbelievable conservation issue on islands.
So we've got time for one last question here, and someone asked, what's the biggest movement that you've seen of the gallinules? So what's the furthest that they've moved from one wetland to another in your study?
Oh, okay. That was a very timely question. We just recently had a report of a bird. I think the bird might have been traveling last summer, but we only recently heard about it. But this is a bird called Captain America, because he had a red, white, and blue band. And he was banded. What's that?
I said it makes sense. I like the name.
Yeah. I wish I had come up with the name, but I regret to say I was not the but he was banded on a golf course at the Turtle Bay Resort on the north shore of Hawaii, and he moved almost all the way down the windward or east side of the island to the Waimanalo area. And we're not clear yet on where exactly he was found, but somebody found him injured and brought him into a vet's office. And unfortunately, he died. But he had moved something huge. I don't know, 30-something miles. I want to say it was quite a distance. So clearly, if they want to, they can really get out there and get moving. We're just wondering, sort of what are the causes for that behavior and how often does it happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So if you have any other questions, feel free to tweet them to us. I'm going to say thank you to Charles for joining us. It was a lot of fun having you on. And when you guys start doing your field work, feel free to come back on.
We'll be glad to, and thank you so much for having me. And a big mahalo to everyone listening today.
And to everyone out there, thank you for joining us. We really appreciated the engagement. If you have any more questions, like I said, feel free to tweet us. You can reach Charles at Gulio Thoughts. You can reach me at either the Scicomm Monday handle, or you can tweet me at my personal Twitter handle at wildlifebiogal.com. A reminder for next week that we will be having Tiana Burke. She's a grad student at Trent University in Canada, and she works with bank swallows. So it's more ornithology fun for all the birders out there. And until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Go out, explore, do some science, and have some fun. And hopefully we will see you next Monday.